Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. What if I told you we were just 1 week away from a new Zelda game hitting Switch 2? You may be thinking I'm kind of crazy right now, but next week we get Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, which is a Musou prequel to Tears of the Kingdom. So we are going to focus the main segment of the show on that topic. What is the Musou genre? What are Warriors games? And what is the deal with Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment? Joining me for that is the newest addition to the Game Informer editorial staff. He's currently a video editor at Game Informer, and he's also a co-host of two of my favorite gaming podcasts, Axe of the Blood God and Normandy FM, not to mention the co-host of the Game Informer show. It's Eric Van Allen. Eric, how are you?
Hi, hello. I counted it earlier, and I think because of this, I will appear on 4 different podcasts this week.
Hey, there are weeks like that. I've had weeks in very recent memory where it is just like a podcast appearance after podcast appearance. And, you make the rounds, and it also helps when you co-host 3 podcasts of your own. So
True. I mean, there are some weeks where I hold back from some and coming up pretty soon, I'll, the nice part about the new state of Axe of the Blood God is that we've got a little bit more flexibility to handle if there's, a Saturday where I'm like, I want to take a weekend off. I haven't had a free Saturday morning in over a year. So, we've got those contingencies, but it's that time of year. There's games coming out. There's stuff to talk about. This is where we do probably our most content coverage across podcasting, across Game Informer and editorial. This is the point in time where games are just launching over the walls, and we are on the other side watching them come over.
It really does feel like that sometimes, where it's just like a flood, an avalanche of games coming our way. And it's like, well, I guess we'll just stop what we can and just let the other ones roll on by, which, that's all you can really do in this time when it's just an onslaught of games. It's just incredible how many games we've gotten, and surprise games too. So we are going to be talking about 2 of those new games at the tail end of the show, as well as I mentioned at the top, we're going to be talking about Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment and the Warriors franchise, genre, however you want to classify it as a whole, during the main segment. But we do have a little bit of news to get to here in the start. But Eric, before we do that, we have a time-honored tradition whenever somebody makes their debut on this fine podcast, and that is allowing the listeners to get to know the debuting guest through the lens of their history with Nintendo. So I'm going to ask you 2 questions here. The first of which is, what was your first Nintendo game? It can be your first console you ever owned, first game you ever played, first memory you had watching somebody play, first game you ever owned, whatever you want to interpret this as.
Yeah, I spent all day thinking about these questions because I think for the first one, for my first Nintendo game, I mean, there is photographic evidence of me at an age at which I have no recollection, no memories, nothing was forming in the cranial lobe, but I was sitting in my dad's lap and we were playing Duck Hunt on the NES. So that would be that, or like Super Mario World would have been the very, very first, like, ever time I would have touched a controller, been anywhere near a video game. But I think when I think about my first Nintendo game, the one that really speaks to me is, I forget which birthday this was, but my dad, he's like the reason I'm into games. Like he was a gamer. He taught me, gaming from a young age, and throughout most of my life, a lot of my gaming emulated a lot of that, a lot of PC gaming because of that, but also Nintendo and Nintendo handhelds specifically. And so on one of my birthdays, he got me a Game Boy Pocket. I believe it was the ice blue version because it matched my eyes. That was really cool. But yeah, it was the cold ice blue version. And he had taken a recommendation from one of the clerks working there. It was at a local game store. This is back when you had mom and pop game shops that were much more prevalent than they are nowadays. And the clerk at the store said, you've got a son, he's about, so-and-so age. Try this game. My dad did not know what it was. He had given me The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening.
Oh, that little game.
Yeah, you might have heard of it. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening to this day remains probably in my top 10 games of all time. It's an
Wow.
absolutely incredible game. I don't know if I've ever actually told this story. When I was young, I wasn't like reading the text of the game. So I thought like I had invented my own story for what it was about. And so I thought that Link was like this kid who was off at summer camp and was like trying to escape it or something. It was weird. But then finally, like I sat down and read the text of the story and was playing it. I was like, oh, this is what is actually happening. But I still love that game to this day. I think very early on, I noted that it was a very different type of story. I was already reading like a little bit ahead of my level, so I really enjoyed that it was deep in themes and working in ideas and symbolism and representation of stuff through these, you know, now what I would call Lynchian concepts to create just, I think, an adventure that we haven't really seen from that series since. You know, it's tried to emulate it in a few ways, but I still think the original Link's Awakening, the Game Boy version, is very singular in that series and one that will always stick with me for that reason.
Did you ever play the Switch remake? What were your thoughts?
I did, and I didn't like it.
Oh no. Was it the art
I
style? Was it the like performance problems? What was it?
The performance problems were definitely up there, but I think, yeah, as I was saying before, there's a singular nature to that game, and a lot of it is not just, you know, it would be easy to say, oh, I don't like the toy based art style, and it wasn't exactly that. It was more that doing so and the way that it did certain things to kind of modernize it, make it feel more like Link to the Past or other games, made it feel less like Link's Awakening. I think one thing that always stuck out to me that I disliked about it was that instead of having screens and transitions between the screens, you had this kind of constant overhead camera,
Mhm.
and there's something about the transitional phase in the Game Boy version when you're moving from one place to another that feels very dreamlike, that feels very surreal, and captures that feeling of not really knowing what's going on, where you are. You can have those moments where you transition from one screen to another and it feels like you're turning the page in a book or in a manga, and suddenly what's going on here? Where am I? I'm in a completely different place. And it doesn't hit the same when you're you have this overhead view of kind of a toy box. It's like, okay, it's a different aesthetic completely. It's a different vibe completely. And so that's not to say that I think it's a bad game. I just think it did not capture what made Link's Awakening special for me. And so it was always going to kind of be fighting that and fighting my rosy recollection of that game.
The one thing I will say that the remake does substantially better is have more than two face buttons, because that is the one thing that I can't stand in, you know, going back to play it in the 2020s of like, all right, I have to unequip my shield or my sword in order to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Having those just have dedicated buttons, undeniably a great quality of life improvement.
It's good quality of life. I'm also a sicko who will happily be like, we don't need quality of life. We're fine. So, I walked uphill both ways in those Pegasus boots. We're doing great.
So you're more of a water temple in Ocarina of Time sicko.
Yeah.
Oh no.
I don't have a ton of nostalgia for the 3D Zeldas, the same way that a lot of my nostalgia for Nintendo is based in very weird pockets of it. I find that a lot of people, when they say they love Nintendo games, they're talking about Mario, they're talking about Donkey Kong, they're talking about these standouts and sort of system sellers. My history, as I said, with Nintendo, much more handheld focused, very focused on a lot of the handheld exclusives they got either for themselves or through third parties, that kind of shaped those games as being something different, as being something a little bit off the beaten path. And through the Game Boy, through the Game Boy Advance, especially through the DS, which is probably in the running for my favorite console of all time. Like Nintendo was shaped in a lot of ways by that, and I like when Nintendo gets weird with that stuff. I've always liked weird Nintendo more than I like sort of the family friendly, everybody having fun Nintendo.
So you're less of a Switch fan and more of a Wii fan, I take it.
I do like the Wii. I do love the Switch though. I think the Switch was kind of the merging of the timelines. That
Sure.
was where it all came together. Like here is weird Nintendo and modern Nintendo and family friendly Nintendo, and it all meets together. But my weird is not even necessarily. It doesn't have to be Majora's Mask or anything like that. It can be Clubhouse games.
Mm.
51 worldwide classics, and they're all fantastic. They're all really good except the baseball game. The baseball game, don't play it online. The lag is terrible. But everything else is fantastic.
Well, that segues perfectly into the second part of this question, which is, what is your favorite Nintendo game of all time? I take it this is the difficult part of the question that you were referencing.
Yeah. I had to really. I'm still thinking about this one because it's there's two in the running. If I had to just put it down and say it, and neither of them are Link's Awakening. Um, I think if I really had to press myself for something that was not only like my favorite game, but felt very foundational to who I am as a person and what it, what it became in my life, I might have to go Fire Emblem Awakening. That
Oh,
might be it.
that's a good
Uh
one.
it's like that or Advance Wars are kind of both in that line of tactics. And we'll probably talk about this. It'll be very relevant for later on in the podcast. But uh the Game Boy Advance games, the Fire Emblem, the Sacred Stones, which is also probably one of my favorite Fire Emblems of all time, were hugely important for getting me into that genre and seeing what sort of potential laid in that genre. And then tactics games, strategy games, I've been playing them my entire life. My earliest gaming memories, period, are of playing Command and Conquer against my dad on the computer. Like I love strategy, I love tactics, I love ordering units around and the metagaming and everything that happens within that. And uh, I love that we're in like a tactics renaissance right now. I love that everyone has finally realized that tactics is one of the best formats for for a video game, and we're just making bangers around them. Everything from the Ivalice Chronicles, which we'll talk about, to Fire Emblem being kind of elevated at this point. I think we're finally past the era of Fire Emblem so dead, Fire Emblem so back, and now we're kind of at the point where Fire Emblem is a like larger property of Nintendo that feels like it's not always fighting for its last breath. And uh Sparks of Hope, let me tell you, Sparks of Hope, it's an underrated gem. Really, really great game. Wish more people would talk about it. Honestly, one of my favorite tactics games I've played in the last like 5-10 years.
Yeah, I mean the Mario plus Rabbids games were very good. I loved
Mm-hmm,
those games so much, especially the first one. The first one was so novel. It's one of those situations like I know I have a Marvel vs. Capcom 2 cabinet behind me
mm-hmm,
if you're
mm-hmm.
watching the video version, but I wish like and we're getting this with Marvel Tokon, but I always just wanted a Marvel fighting game. And that's how I kind of felt about Sparks of Hope and Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, where it was like, yeah, this is cool. Can we just do away with the Rabbids and just have Mario and his people there?
I love the like okay, I was with you in Kingdom Battle, but in Sparks of Hope, they gave the Rabbids a little bit more personality. Like Mario Rabbid or Rabbid Mario, love him. Just the most like he shows up, he's just like, bada bing, bada boom, been shot at, and then he like punches stuff with his fists. I'm like, that's perfect. That's all you needed to do with the rabbits to make me love them. It's excellent. So yeah.
Fair enough. You talked about how Fire Emblem is kind of like now like a almost like a tentpole franchise for Nintendo, and it's
Yeah.
true. And it's been wild to watch that transformation. I would say it all kind of started rolling downhill with Awakening, one of your favorite games. But like, do you think Smash Brothers is largely to thank for that? For like how many characters from the Fire Emblem franchise they put in those rosters?
Well, I mean, to chart the history of Fire Emblem, especially in the West, you do have to chart the history of Smash Brothers because Fire Emblem, to be fair, was a large franchise for Nintendo in Japan, but it just never came over to the West for whatever reason. Lots of speculation and quotes throughout the years about that. But with Melee, they put out Marth and Roy, and suddenly people were like, "Who are these characters?" And thankfully, Marth and Roy were also kind of busted in Melee, and so people got to know them pretty fast because everybody would play as them. And then the Game Boy Advance Fire Emblems came over, and I think they picked the exact right games to bring over, especially that original Fire Emblem, the seventh Fire Emblem in Japan. If you can imagine that, it's kind of almost like the Final Fantasy VII moment for a series where it's like, here's the breakthrough. It's actually like the seventh game in a series, but it's going to really break through in a way that brings it to a new generation, a new audience. And Fire Emblem 7 is just, oh my God, I still think that I know they'll never do it, but if they could ever do some sort of updated version of those pixel Fire Emblem games, they're incredible. The animations are second to none, and they're amazing. And but you have Fire Emblem Sacred Stones, and then GameCube. You know, we like to talk about GameCube very rosily now, but it was not Nintendo's strongest era. And you have, oh my god, Path of Radiance on that one, and then Radiant Dawn on the Wii basically got no attention. It was the era of it's so over, and then Awakening comes in, we're so back. Fates comes in, a lot of mixed opinions on Fates. And it would oscillate, and I think Three Houses is really the moment where Fire Emblem got established and felt like it was present in the moment. And it is partially for Three Houses, the game, and also for the Switch being as popular as it was, that they managed to nail a home run when everybody was looking, right? And I think that alone has kind of cemented Fire Emblem as saying like, okay, like I personally, I didn't love Engage all that much, but it didn't really make me feel like, oh, Fire Emblem's so over, you know, how do we resurrect the series? It's like, no, it's just they had a game I didn't like. We'll see what the next one's like. It's good to finally have that with that series, whereas previously it was really, you know, touch and go from game to game.
Yeah, I mean, people forget that like as big of a smash hit as it is now, Animal Crossing was that way for quite a
Hmm.
long time as
Hmm.
well. It was like, yeah, there was a very loud contingency of people who were like, "Come on, Animal Crossing!" every single Nintendo Direct, and then New Horizons elevated it to a tier one Nintendo franchise,
Absolutely.
time and place. So like, it really only takes one, or in Fire Emblem's case, I would say two, because I would say Awakening was kind of the start, but you're right. Three Houses was like when it became a part of the cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of Nintendo series, it was the Switch became the rising tide that elevated
Mhm.
everything. I mean, Metroid got more of a boost. Mario Kart went from something that I think everybody already was familiar with and loved, but to the point that Mario Kart, I was joking with a friend the other day, I think Mario Kart might be more popular than Mario. Like I think more people like children these days might know Mario more from Mario Kart than they do from actual like a traditional quote unquote Mario game. And that's just what happens when the system takes off like the Nintendo Switch did, when it's getting quoted in Sabrina Carpenter songs. Like it literally just elevates the entire platform. And I think that has been a boon for a lot of those series. Splatoon got huge.
Mhm.
Fire Emblem feels like it's on stable ground. Even Metroid is now leading directs, and it's this big series again. And I think it's great across the board for all those franchises.
Just pouring one out for my dear friend Star Fox.
Star Fox not even found dead in a ditch, you know. Star Fox
Still
not
missing.
found on the page.
MIA. So we're going to talk more about tactics games at the tail end of the show. But before we jump into the news topics of this episode, just a reminder that you are listening to the All Things Nintendo podcast. This show arrives in your podcast feeds completely free each and every Friday, brought to you by the fine folks who support me on Patreon. Without people like them, this show simply would not exist. You can join the Patreon for as little as $3 a month. That gets you access to the community Discord, which lets you hang out with fellow listeners of the show. There are also $5 and $10 tiers that get you things like early and ad-free episodes, plus shout-outs at the end of every show. Just go to patreon.com, search All Things Nintendo. It is only because of the wonderful folks who support this show that it is able to continue each and every week. Also, shout out to, I think I've got like 3 or 4 new patrons over the last couple of weeks. Thank you so much. That really does mean a lot. So thanks to those folks. It's impossible to overstate how important Patreon support is. And I know you know that very well, Eric, as somebody who also has a Patreon supported podcast.
Patreon like paid my apartment bills for a few months. That was it's huge. It really does make a difference. So I highly recommend, if you like listening to this podcast, if you like listening to any of the stuff out there, find ways to directly support and engage with and if you're in a situation where you can't monetarily do that, sharing, recommending it to your friends, getting the word out there always helps too. We love, and honestly, like sending a note over to be like, hey, we like the work you do. Let me tell you, there are days where that really salvages the mental, you know? So, yeah, no, support the people who make the things that you like.
100%. And obviously, as Eric mentioned, like not everybody is in a position to do that, but if you are, it really does mean a lot, and it helps shows like this one, like Axe of the Blood God, and like
Mm-hmm,
most
mm-hmm.
of the podcasts you listen to probably every week continue in the way that they have been. So not a ton of news to get to here, Eric, but a few things came across the wire this week. First up, like we usually do, we're going to get into a little bit of the actual Nintendo news, but again, of which there was not much. But Nintendo did announce a partnership with Laced Records for a vinyl release of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild soundtrack. And the soundtrack comes in two different versions, a double LP that has 34 tracks and an 8 LP box set with 130 tracks. And each of those has its own color variant. The double LP is kind of like a blue and white variant, and the 8 LP box has four. It's like white discs, and then it has four of them with like a blue splatter, and four of them with like a gold splatter. So it's very, very cool looking. The 2 LP set is $49, and the 8 LP set is $195. So we're carrying forward those Nintendo prices even on the soundtracks. Pre-orders are available now, and the set is coming out June 19th of next year. The standard editions, which are just like the black vinyl, are going to be available at select retailers. So you'll actually should be able to walk up and buy it off a shelf when it comes out in June. But the variants themselves are only going to be available on the My Nintendo store, on the Laced Records store, and then at Nintendo New York or Nintendo San Francisco. And since this is a rare occasion that Nintendo officially releases physical soundtracks in the US, because it's actually a pretty commonplace thing in Japan, Variety had an interview with the president of player and product experience at Nintendo, Bill Trinan, about this release. And he said in that Variety article, quote, "In the Japanese market, CD is still a pretty prominent format there, and they do a lot of video game soundtracks on CD in Japan. And they've been doing that for years and years. Here in the US, we haven't been releasing much in way of physical soundtracks at all. And so partly this is a little bit about us trying to gauge and understand what is the demand for physical soundtracks in the United States. Part of this is also simply an interest in trying to bring video game music to a broader audience, and it's part of a few steps that we've taken." I mean, he's obviously referring to Nintendo Music as an app, which I would argue, if you really want to bring it to a broader audience, you just put it on Spotify and Apple Music, but that's another conversation. Eric, I don't know about you, but I am a fan of vinyl records. I have a modest but pretty strong collection of vinyl records. And in fact, one of my favorite purchases from my trip to Japan in July, I went to Tower Records in Shibuya, went to the video game section, which there is a video game section on this multi-floor record shop, and I picked up the Super Mario World soundtrack on vinyl. Fantastic. I mean, it was expensive because it's a Nintendo release, but I mean, it's worth it. Where are you falling on this one?
All my vinyl is in boxes still, because for the listeners at home, I've recently moved, although it's been about, I think, 3 weeks, almost a month that I've been here in Minneapolis now, which is crazy. The time has flown in a lot of ways, but I'm still in boxes in a lot of places, and my my LP collection is one of them. My LPs I like to joke that it's basically a 50-50 divide between, or maybe like 50-25-25. 50% video game soundtracks. I have Undertale, I have Persona 5, I have the Nier collection that came out, I have the Final Fantasy 14 soundtracks that came out, and then I have a bunch of other stuff that's like old music that I like. So I have a lot of jazz, I have a lot of older stuff from like Simon and Garfunkel and things like that, stuff I grew up with. And then a lot of modern music. I have shout outs to Pool Kids, one of my favorite modern touring bands. They're absolutely incredible. Go listen to their stuff. They're great. I actually don't have their newest album on vinyl yet. I need to rectify that. But yeah, I do enjoy vinyl. There's something to it where, and I haven't done this in a hot minute, I've been craving it lately recently, is to just have a good morning, like a Sunday morning where you wake up at a nice time, sun's coming up, and as you make your coffee and all that, you settle down with the breakfast, you put on a vinyl record. It's just chill. It's just
good
nice.
vibes. Good vibes. Yeah. I actually did that last night. Put on not the typical stuff that I would listen to, but a vinyl that I have because my partner's a big fan. I put on Cowboy Carter by Beyonce, and it's an incredible album. Even though I'm not like somebody who listens to a lot of Beyonce stuff, like that album is fantastic, and hearing it on vinyl, it just gives it an entirely different experience. And that's why I'm so excited for this Breath of the Wild release. Is it kind of makes you notice parts of a song that you wouldn't otherwise notice. And I know that this makes us sound like audiophile snobs and everything, but like it is a different experience than just kind of like the passive feeling of throwing on your AirPods or putting your phone in like, you know, in the corner of the kitchen while you cook or whatever. But like you actually have to intentionally like be paying attention to the music because, you know, it plays like 4, maybe 5 songs, and then you have to flip the disc, or you have to, you know, you can't just be put a playlist on shuffle. You actually have to be intentional about what song you want to listen to.
Yeah, it really is. Like, you can go into all kinds of stuff about the quality of the sound and if you have good speakers, a good turntable to put it all on and all that kind of stuff. But there is, at the base level, as long as you have something that is like a solid machine, you're just going to have a more intentional, focused experience with it. Even if I am doing other stuff, often I'll have a book with me or something like that. But even then, I try to make it so that's not a screen experience. And you'd be surprised at just how differently your brain starts to operate when you're not just exposed to the portal of all information at all times. You know, I think it really helped me because for years I part of this job really just makes you get a social media addiction, and you don't, and I use that word very intentionally to mean that you start to crave the feeling of looking at your phone and seeing notifications, and you start to feel distance when you don't have it, and you get used to the feedback loops there. And
Hmm.
one of the things that helped me with that, along with, you know, Twitter becoming a tire fire and all that, was having stuff in my life that was bespoke, that was meant for a specific purpose. So getting these, like, I have some of these retro throwback devices and stuff like that, like Ambernick and all that. I have the turntable. I just have more things in my life that are meant for an explicit purpose that do one thing very well. And when I use it, it means I am kind of more focused in that activity than I would be otherwise. And it really does change the way that you intake things. And I think it's good. It's good to establish that distance and kind of like reinterpret media in that way. Because there's a lot of times where, yeah, I put on a new album, but I'm like working or I'm doing something else or I'm playing a game and I'm not really like listening to it. I'm not paying attention to it. And then later on I talk to somebody and I'm like, oh yeah, I listened to that new album, but I didn't
Don't
really
remember anything.
have
Yeah.
thoughts on it. Like, it was just kind of present. And I'm trying to change that. So I think a turntable does a lot for that.
It really does, and it's kind of become like a little bit of like tradition or ritual, however you want to say, but like kind of like a way to say goodbye to some of these musicians as they unfortunately pass away. I kind of started it back when Taylor Hawkins, the drummer of the Foo Fighters,
Yeah, yeah.
suddenly passed away. Probably 3 years ago now. Where I just took all of my Foo Fighters albums, put them on vinyl back to back, and just like kind of sat and just like hung out on the couch, no phone, just like poured myself an adult beverage and just like enjoyed the music and just listen to it with intention. I did that with
Mhm.
Ozzy, threw on some old Sabbath albums and some of his solo stuff, and then more recently with Ace Frehley from Kiss. I only have one
Oh
Kiss album
yeah.
on vinyl, but yeah, like it's kind of like I'm not going to any of these funerals, but it's kind of like just like a kind of like I don't know, a way to say goodbye to a lot of these legends that I've listened to on, you know, countless hours.
Yeah, yeah. And also like just cleanses your soul, you know. A lot of times the one I've probably gotten the most use out of is my Cowboy Bebop soundtrack, which I will put that on just to have, like, that is the one I will put on while I'm cooking or while I'm drinking coffee in the morning or whatever. And it just always, it's music that just kind of, I don't know, it challenges me in a lot of ways. Like, jazz is never easy listening. There's always a lot of things happening, a lot of moving parts, but it also just kind of helps get the creative sparks going. It gets your mind warmed up in a lot of ways. And so, yeah. Shout outs to
Yeah.
Yoko Kano. Yeah.
Yeah, I also have that Persona 5 soundtrack on vinyl, and
Ooh, yeah, it's
it's
good.
so good. One of the greatest soundtracks of all time. Uh, Not really news quite yet, but I've always kind of had this weird wondering of why the Switch and Switch 2 just have so few media apps. And it looks like a YouTube app might be on the way for Switch 2. I read this over at Nintendo Life. So there is a YouTube app on Switch 1,
Yeah.
but it doesn't work on Switch 2 from my understanding.
Great.
So so Nintendo Life spotted this, that back in June, YouTube actually mentioned it was working on a Switch 2 app. And then this week somebody asked like, "Hey, what's going on with this? It's been several months since you said you were working on this." They responded on X saying, "YouTube is not yet available on Nintendo Switch 2, but we hope to be offering it soon." So now, editing concerns aside about that response, because why don't you just say we hope to offer it soon, not we hope to be offering it? That's just,
Mhm.
but anyway, it seems like we're getting a YouTube app soon, which is fine. Like we all have our phones and in some cases tablets and everything. So I don't know how valuable these apps really are for like a portable device, but like I mean I have these apps for like TV mode, right? Like for like
Right.
when I am sitting in front of the TV, I like firing up my Xbox so I don't have to connect my TV to the Wi-Fi or whatever. So that works, but like I mean, what value does it really have to have like the Switch 2 having like Netflix or YouTube or Disney Plus?
I think there's the value I would suggest is that as somebody who travels, obviously a lot of hotels have swapped now to being able to just log into apps using your information. They often have some sort of way to just say like, I want to manually sign out at the end of, my stay, and you hit the button and it clears everything. But if you have concerns about security, privacy, all that kind of stuff, or especially if you're staying in like an Airbnb or something like that, by the way, really fun game you can play if you're ever staying in an Airbnb is go into YouTube and see who didn't log their accounts out, because you can just go. Lots of people forget to do it. It's really funny to go through other people's algorithms and recommendations on an Airbnb YouTube. That's your hot tip. But if you have reasons for that, I mean, so again, my dad also traveled a lot for work, and so he would always bring his Switch with him, and that was just an effective tool to be able to watch stuff. But often it didn't turn into that because it missed a lot of the apps. I think the only ones I had on my Switch One were YouTube, Crunchyroll, and I think Hulu was on there.
I
That
think it
was,
had one for a while. I thought I read like a couple years ago they like decommissioned it.
I mean, the other annoying part of all of this, and this will depend on what kind of systems you use for this at your own home, but depending on what hardware you use, that has its own issues with whether it has every streaming app or not. Because I've been a Roku user pretty much most of the streaming era, as it's from when it started to now, and Roku and Twitch have always been a problem.
Mm.
It for some reason getting a Twitch app on Roku has just been the eternal problem. Whereas if you had a Fire Stick, it'd be super easy because it's right there. But that's kind of the nice part, is that if you have a device that you can just take with you and jam into the HDMI slot of a hotel TV or something like that, or you're staying at somebody's place and you just want to be able to watch something, now you've got it. And now you've got one fewer device that you do need to travel with. But I guess I do agree, at the end of the day, the number of times I've used that functionality has been, I don't know, maybe 10 to 12 times total, when it had like a meaningful impact, where I was at a place and I was like, oh, we can watch YouTube because I have my Switch dock and my HDMI cable. And you're still setting up like an entire setup right there.
Mhm.
You can't HDMI directly in to send that thing anyways. So I guess it's a very narrow use case, and a lot of people have probably already figured out workarounds for it to begin with. But it'd be nice to have.
Yeah, it
YouTube, I think, would be the one that I would want out of everything else. I'm fine if Peacock isn't on Switch, but having YouTube and maybe like some other like Twitch probably available on my Switch is just nice to have.
but without Peacock, you can't watch the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade where Mario is gonna be appearing.
Exactly. What am I going to do then? It's how am I going to see the Mario and the Luffy balloons slam into each other if I don't have Peacock on my Switch too?
Well, the thing for me though is like I have my phone for when I'm traveling, right, or my
Mhm.
iPad, and then when I'm at home, it's like I know I'm not the typical use case where because I have every console aside
Right.
from like things like the Atari VCS or whatever, but like I have all the mainstream consoles of like a PS5 and Xbox Series X and a Switch 2, and it's like yeah I have like at least 5 or 6 devices that have Netflix and Disney Plus and everything. So while in 2017 it felt really wild that Nintendo didn't have any of these apps, I think nowadays I'm a little bit more at peace with it.
Yeah, is what is.
Hmm.
Ultimately, I think a lot of people's media habits have calcified over the years, and you already, like I said, probably have solutions. And the Switch 2 at this point having those apps is nice to have. And it is very funny that the old app doesn't work on the new app. Like that was one of the things that got caught that couldn't carry over. But yeah, I mean, for the people who use it, I understand why you would want it really bad. But I venture to guess this is not a widespread demand. But I could be wrong. I could be
Yeah.
wrong.
Well, the people aren't riding in the streets yet, and the Switch 1 has been out for 8 years, 8+ years.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Well, you can always watch YouTube on your phone if you are traveling and want to do it that way. And you know what else you can play on your phone? Vampire Survivors and Balatro. Though I would say that Balatro is better on your phone, Vampire Survivors is better on your Switch, but that's up for debate, I guess. But those are two of the greatest indie games of the last 5 years, and they are finally crossing over. So the new free DLC, Antechamber, lets you use 4 Balatro characters. Antechamber, up the ante.
Like you
Yeah, yeah,
ante.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
Ante,
ante. Yeah.
Antechamber. Okay, I was like,
But spelled like a poker ante and not like anti.
correct. Antechamber. So it lets you use
Chamber, really.
lets you use 4 Balatro characters in Vampire Survivors, 4 new weapons, a new stage full of cards, and a remix of the Balatro theme. So
Right.
not bad for a free update. And then Vampire Survivors is in Balatro as well as decks you can use, and both of those crossovers are available now. So I'm assuming you're a fan of both of these games?
I love roguelikes, so I have played a significant amount of both of them. I haven't really gone back to either one of them though in a long time. I feel like I have my very select few roguelikes that I return to very often, and then it's usually just whatever the flavor of the month is that I'm kind of hooked onto. But Baladro definitely ate up hours of my life. I know a lot of people who got way deeper into it. Vampire Survivors was the same way, and you know they both hit and have stuck. So happy to see them trucking on.
Yeah, so these are 2 games that I've consistently touted as like I'm on a plane and I want time to pass fast. Fire up Balatro, fire up Vampire Survivors. What's your game for that situation?
I've got 2 as well.
Okay.
One is the roguelite I always go back to, which I think is the king of all rogue games and possibly one of the best games that's been made while I have been alive. Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire, I will never stop going back to. I don't even go for high ascension runs or anything like that. I love the mechanics of it. I love the way those characters play. I love the way the game is designed. I think it's just an incredibly well made game. It really just never gets old. And then my other one, this is it is a Switch game. It's Nintendo. It's Picross. I love Picross. Picross makes any flight go so much faster. I just sit there and play through whichever Picrosses have come out that I haven't played yet. There's usually a nice enough gap between trips that there's at least 2 to 3 new Picross games from Jupiter and other friends that I always have something new to play. So yeah.
Well, there you go. If you are new to the Switch ecosystem or you have a trip coming up, there are 4 great games you can check out for when you travel, and 2 of them are crossing over. But Eric, we are going to take our first break of this episode, and when we get back, we'll be talking all about Hyrule Warriors, Age of Imprisonment, and the Musou genre. We will be right back. We are back, and Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment is, believe it or not, coming out next week. It doesn't feel like it's right around the corner, but it is. In fact, so much so that, we're probably have people playing it right now, people who have advanced copies of it. We are not in that camp because we're still not on the pre-release distribution list at Game Informer, but we are going to be talking about that game a little bit, as well as its genre. So if you're unfamiliar with what Hyrule Warriors is, it is a Zelda spin-off series that is a Musou game. The Musou genre is typically associated with Dynasty Warriors, but it has expanded to other franchises and several high-profile licensed spin-offs. So I just want to talk a little bit about Musou and Hyrule Warriors. So Eric, I wanted to have you come on to chat about this because you're a fan of these games. And the way I describe Musou and like Warriors games to people is that you kind of take control of like an overpowered character. It's a fast-paced action game with a little bit of strategy. You slash through armies of enemies as pretty much a one-person wrecking crew, although there are sometimes multiplayer elements or NPCs that help you out. What am I missing here?
I'd say that's pretty accurate. I'm also going to tell you that I'm going to deliver some real Bon Iver vibes on this,
Oh,
where
it's moose.
it is you're pronouncing it correctly. I believe it is Musou is the correct way to say it. I am absolutely going to fall back into calling it a Muso because that's how I've always said it, and I will fall back into it. Much like Bon Iver is actually Bon Iver when my Southern comes out. So pre apologies for that, but yeah, I've been playing Muso games since like PlayStation 2, Dynasty Warriors 3, Dynasty Warriors 4, Dynasty Warriors 5. Classic games in their own right. I think you're pretty much dead on. It started out back in Dynasty Warriors 2. And go play Dynasty Warriors 1, by the way. At some point, it's a completely different video game. But with 2, envisioning this idea of a battlefield where you are a commander, but you're not really commanding, though that has changed over the years. You're kind of leading forces and pushing lines and trying to seize bases and basically play somewhat strategically, though often I like to compare it to you're spinning a lot of plates. I think the best Muso games make you feel like you are trying to spin these plates and manage where all of these things are happening, and sometimes that does mean making risk reward assessments in the moment. I think the recent Dynasty Warriors Origins, which by the way is absolutely fantastic, if you've ever wanted an entry point into this genre, I would actually point to that one. I think it's great. There's a lot of times where you have to say, no, I got to stay committed to what my role in the strategy is, because if I piece out from the front line now and go to this other spot where they're getting flanked, our whole line could crumble. Everything could fall apart. So I need to make the right choice in the right moment here. Um, Traditionally based in Dynasty Warriors, the Three Kingdoms games, based around the romance of the Three Kingdoms and that historical story. But like you said, did go on to eventually cover a lot of Japanese history. Was a big one with the Samurai Warriors games, and then yeah, they became IP spinoff fodder, and I mean that in a positive mostly way. And even some others have kind of stepped in. We've had Dragon Quest Heroes was a Dragon Quest warrior style game, and even a lot of action games I think have taken some ideas from this. And you have the really out there versions where Drakengard 1 is considered a Muso. It is not a good Muso, but it's a Muso. So it's interesting. It's a much larger genre than I think people often associate. They usually think of just kind of one developer, one team is kind of making all these, but it is kind of a wide swath of games that has evolved over time. And I think Hyrule Warriors is maybe the most indicative inflection point of that change.
So I was looking for like release dates and everything while I was doing a little bit of digging on the genre. And I noticed that Wikipedia classifies these games as hack and slash. Do you, as a fan, agree or disagree with that? This is like a subgenre of the hack and slash genre.
I guess I've always thought that hack and slash was a really unwieldy genre concept to begin with. In the same way that Metroidvania often falls short of describing the actual game it's supposed to be describing, because it just becomes a shorthand for like, oh, it's you're gonna have a map and you look for things. It's like, yeah, that's a lot of video games. It's I think hack and slash is part of what you do, but I do think that the scale of battle, that the strategic element of taking bases, of not just going and fighting things, I think there's a meaningful difference between, say, beat 'em ups like a Sifu, or even you want to talk about a real hack and slash, a traditional action game like a Devil May Cry or a Metal Gear Rising. There is a significant difference between that and a Muso game. And Muso games also have a lot of meta progression that is built into them. Some of the best ones often have this sort of escalation where you're building characters up over battles, and there's even encouragement to go back and replay battles or do new campaigns to build characters up to unlock more stuff. It's very arcadey in that way almost, where you kind of do runs of different characters. I think some of my favorites, like Dynasty Warriors 5, get into that, where you're kind of, okay, I'm going to play through Sun Tse's chapter of Wu in Dynasty Warriors 5. I'm going to see history from his perspective, his first battle, his last battle, all of that. And then I'm going to go play Diao-chan and do that side of things. I'm going to, play Lu Bu and see what Lu Bu was up to all this time. And I think it gets really interesting when you dig into that stuff. And that is actually where the strength of Musou games often lie, is that they're pretty interesting vehicles for storytelling and especially for drama on the battlefield, which is not always easy to capture in a traditional action game.
Yeah, they do a great job of like being like, all right, well, the action is so over the top. Like you are literally like one person, and your sword usually can swipe through in any given slash, what, like 5 to 20 people with
Mhm,
one
mhm.
swing of your sword, and you're just wiping out just full armies of enemies as you're going through. So it really gives them kind of free license to go in and be as melodramatic with the storytelling as possible. And I think that it strikes a really good tone in a lot of these games, uh, that like feels not too dissonant from the brand of action that you're getting on the screen.
Exactly. The idea even is often that a lot of Musou games, unless you're playing on the hardest difficulty, are not challenging to play in the moment. The challenge does not come from a Souls like trying to read attack patterns and dodge correctly. Again, there are games that buck this. Dynasty Warriors Origins has a few characters that kind of pose themselves as real bosses in real big moments, but for the large part, the challenge often comes from managing the battlefield and managing those crises and understanding when you need to push, when you need to hold back, trying to time up certain attacks so that way they gain advantage for your team, or doing completely different objectives where you're trying to retreat and you're trying to pull back and you're trying to hold a position maybe, and that stuff gets really really interesting. So yeah, I think hack and slash is a little bit too boiled down of a descriptor for what this is.
It's almost like how when people describe the old Yakuza games as like brawlers, it's like, yeah, they are, but it's also like this rich RPG and like
Yeah, it's like calling
exploration, and there's so much more. It feels reductive to call it a brawler, which, the combat of those older games starring Kiryu were brawlers, but it's just one small component of it.
yeah, it's like calling Shenmue a brawler, right? Like that is honestly such a smaller part of the larger whole that it does inform the thing that is happening. It does play a focal role, but there's so much else happening in that game that I do think ultimately makes it something notable and something important. So yeah,
My favorite hack and slash, Breath of the Wild.
exactly.
So speaking of Zelda, there have been two Hyrule Warriors games so far, with a third coming out next week. The first Hyrule Warriors game, just called Hyrule Warriors, came out in 2014 for Wii U, 2016 for 3DS, and 2018 on Switch. And it was basically like this weird convergence of different Zelda characters from different games. So there were like, Sheik from Ocarina of Time, and Midna from Twilight Princess, and Skull Kid from Majora's Mask, and Toon Link from Wind Waker, and like Phantom Hourglass and all those games. And Ganondorf was still the bad guy, but in a fun twist, you could actually play as him in some of the levels. And then there were also several other iconic enemies and boss fights from across the series. It almost felt like a multiversal Zelda game, where it's like, yeah, none of these characters have ever interacted with one another. There's even I think the 3DS and Switch version, there is a female version of Link called Link.
Linkle,
Yes.
yeah.
So it's very much like a Marvel's What If, but for Zelda, and has a lot of really great like rock remixes of Zelda themes. Just a fun time, and being able to play as Ganondorf is really novel if you've been a Zelda fan for as long as I have, and as long as Eric has been. So I really enjoyed the first Hyrule Warriors, and that was kind of my primary introduction to the genre. Like I'd known about Dynasty Warriors and Samurai Warriors and all that stuff, and I've seen other ones, other like spin-offs that have happened that we're going to talk about in a second here. But like, yeah, Hyrule Warriors was like, okay, I love Zelda so much, I'm going to give this a shot, and then I ended up having a great time.
Yeah, I think that first Hyrule Warriors really took time to get to where it needed to be, because you had the original release, which was pretty good. It was solid, but it was on a platform that not a lot of people were paying attention to at the time. I believe when it came to 3DS, I don't know if it was a new Nintendo 3DS exclusive, but I do remember there was significant difference between the performance on platforms to the point that a lot of people were saying, "Don't play this game unless you have a new Nintendo 3DS." And speaking bluntly, raise your hand if you had a new Nintendo 3DS.
Eventually.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Only because my base 3DS died on me, so I had to get a new one, and I was like, "Well, I might as well get a new one."
I bought a 3DS XL. It's really weird. So have you seen the show Rick and Morty?
Yeah.
Or yeah, yeah. There's a bit that they do in one of the episodes where Rick is pulling cash out of a bank vault or something. He's saying, "We gotta go to Target, Morty. They're selling the Legend of Zelda 3DS XL. It's on sale for Black Friday. We gotta go, Morty." I saw that episode and texted my brother immediately because I kid you not, we were literally doing that on Thanksgiving where I was like, "They're selling the 3DS XL with the Legend of Zelda with the Triforce. We gotta go. We gotta get one." And that was when I got my 3DS. I'd been playing mostly DS up to that point, but I finally got a 3DS with that one, and strangest feeling. But to highlight, that was I still love Zelda at the time. And then when Hyrule Warriors came out for it, had Linkle and everything, I was like, awesome. And then it was like, you need a new Nintendo 3DS to play it. Not so
Yeah,
awesome.
it was one of those games where it was like a slideshow if you played it
Yes.
on the original 3DS,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it,
yeah.
it ran pretty well on the new 3DS. But it's a Wii U game, so you wouldn't expect it to run well on the base 3DS, but it was just like they didn't want to have too many games be just exclusive to new
I
3DS.
can't think of many off the top of my head. Xenoblade was one of them, I
I
think.
think
Was
so, yeah.
yeah.
I think they only had like 3 or 4.
Yeah. And so ultimately my point is that when it finally came to Switch with the definitive edition, that was like, okay, this is the best version of the game. And also coincidentally, I think one of my favorite Musou games ever. I think that original Hyrule Warriors definitive is so fun. I think they had a lot of fun with it. I think one of my favorite understated parts of it is that characters like Link get these redesigns where they're kind of wearing this chainmail. Like Link has chainmail under his tunic. He looks like he's suited up for war and not
Mhm.
necessarily for kind of the traditional hero's journey that we usually see him on. And I think that's a really, really interesting. We get these clever redesigns of those characters, and then we get to see those characters envisioned in a Musou fashion. So in Musou games, almost like a MOBA, almost like League of Legends and stuff like that, or Pokemon Unite if you've played that. There's a lot of really cool stuff where these characters get kits, they get play styles, they get to embody this certain range of they do specific things very, very well, and the way they fight becomes very distinct. And Koei Tecmo has always been very good about creating different fighting styles that feel very unique and distinct. I think that original Hyrule Warriors had some really, really cool designs for some of the characters that you wouldn't have thought would be combatants and would have those move sets. Even base characters like Zelda got really exciting, fun move sets that felt very different from what you would normally expect. But then Link handles like you would expect Link to, and he does a lot of Link things just on a Musou scale. And it was the perfect marriage. It worked so well. On paper, you'd be like, "What do you mean Hyrule Warriors?" Like, but I think it is a testament to that game's success that it became kind of the start of an ongoing partnership between Nintendo and Koei Tecmo.
Yeah, and there's like even like you press the button to throw bomb and he
Yeah.
just throws like 7 bombs. Like
He
there's
he
nothing
doesn't throw
subtle.
one bomb. It's no, we don't do anything in half measures here.
So most notably, this is a Zelda game not developed by Nintendo, which is a pretty rare thing. We've got like Cadence of Hyrule, which was not developed by Nintendo. But it's not completely unheard of. But in Japan, it wasn't even published by Nintendo. It was published by Koei Tecmo.
Mhm.
So the game was developed by Team Ninja and Omega Force, which Omega Force is pretty much the Musou studio. It's the studio behind the Dynasty Warriors franchise. And in 2020, Omega Force released another game called Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. And here's where it gets a little murky because they sold it very heavily as a prequel to Breath of the Wild. And it's like, yeah, these are the events that took place 100 years before the game and the war between Ganon and the people of Hyrule. And then it ended up not being a true prequel because of weird timeline stuff. And I was, while you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, I interviewed the developers of Age of Calamity about this right before the game came out, and I asked them like, hey, like, since this story plays directly into the stories on the on a mainline Zelda game, what kind of communication exists between the development team of Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity and the development team behind the mainline Zelda franchise? And it was Eiji Aonuma. It was the Hyrule Warriors director Ryota Matsushita and producer Yosuke Hayashi. So two Omega Force developers and one Nintendo luminary. And basically Aonuma says like the actual planning came from the Zelda team, so they were able to collaborate closely with the Warriors team on details ranging from design to story to graphics know-how during development. And of course, the Warriors team brought all their creativity and know-how to bear when integrating Warriors gameplay into the world of Breath of the Wild. And then Matsushita said, to ensure the game inherited the look and tone of Breath of the Wild, we asked the Zelda team to review every detail of what we made. They consistently suggested ways to make the game exponentially more fun while simultaneously showing great respect for the ideas the Warrior team had for this game as an action game. So completely danced around the concept of like, hey, this is a prequel. How does this work? And ended up just, letting the marketing do the talking. And then at the end, it turned out it wasn't even a prequel to Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, I'll be honest. So Hyrule Warriors, I think might be in contention for my favorite Nintendo Warriors game. Well, we'll talk. I'm sure more about those in a moment. But Age of Calamity, kind of the opposite end, where I felt like this is a really strong opportunity for the team to do something really, really cool. I always joke that I wanted this to be like Halo Reach, this sort of doomed narrative where you are fighting a battle that you are going to lose. And like the cards have already been dealt, things are not going to break your ways. Wouldn't that be interesting if you had a Musou game, a traditional power fantasy, but the forces of calamity just are always too much and you're always being pushed back? That could be like really, really, and would really, I think, resonate with the tone of Breath of the Wild so well. Because Breath of the Wild is, when I talked earlier about, my favorite Nintendo games, I alluded to the fact that there was another game that was in contention. It was Breath of the Wild. It's such a melancholic game. It is such a game about meditating on the fact that they lost, and there has been so much loss in Hyrule because of it, and the hero was not able to do what the hero was supposed to do. And I think having this sort of narrative carry in would be so interesting. But ultimately, like, I get why maybe that doesn't make for a compelling game loop. Maybe that doesn't, work on all the levels that they wanted to, or maybe they just wanted this to still be a very multiversal game where you can pull in all these characters like Sidon and Yunobu and all that and still do that sort of thing. I get it. But also I think this was where the Switch was really starting to show its age as hardware. And for all the ways in which I think Koei Tecmo especially has found ways to make a lot of games look incredible on the Switch, and they've been masters of that, and I'm really excited for what they continue to do with the Switch too. Age of Calamity was where I was kind of like, there are sections of that game where I only played about 10-15 hours of it, I think. And the frame rate would just get crazy choppy and it wouldn't know how to handle certain stuff. And I didn't love all the things they did with some of the mechanized divine beasts and stuff. I didn't feel like they added a lot to the gameplay for me. I think overall, in all the ways that the first Hyrule Warriors felt inventive and expansive and like a celebration of Zelda's legacy, this felt too narrow, too confined, and like it was struggling to keep pace.
Mm-hmm. And I did find another quote from Aonuma where I asked, like, why are you doing this as a prequel to Breath of the Wild? And he's like, yeah, it actually, like, it was Hidemaru Fujibayashi, the director of Breath of the Wild, that was like kind of lamenting the fact that they weren't able to really depict the Great Calamity. It was just kind of all through like the storytelling beats of like, hey, here's a mural of the Great Calamity happening, and then like a few of those memories kind of looped into that you've uncovered in Breath of the Wild. And he really wanted to bring that to life in some way. And then around that time, Yosuke Hayashi, who is the producer of the franchise, wanted to carry forward stuff that they had learned from the first Hyrule Warriors into a new collaboration with Nintendo on another Zelda Warriors game. And that's how they ultimately came to wanting to create this. But I still have never heard from them why they chose to completely abandon the like having it be canonical. But we'll talk more about that when it comes around to Age of Imprisonment, which we're going to be talking about in a second here. But there are also several other Musou games that are licensed, which are also largely developed by Omega Force.
Mhm.
The franchises that have been licensed to Omega Force include One Piece, Berserk, Fire Emblem, Dragon Quest, Fist of the North Star, Persona, and a couple of others. Of
Gundam. You
those,
gotta shout out Gundam. The Dynasty Warriors
Gundam,
games
that's
this
right,
game kind of
yeah.
slap. Yeah, they're pretty good.
What is your favorite spin-off outside of Hyrule Warriors? As you've already said, that might be your favorite.
I think the one that might actually be my ultimate favorite, which is weird because I also never got around to finishing this one. It's also one that I got very deep into, but it's a very long game, which is strange, I think, sometimes for a Muso. Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, I think,
Mm.
was so well done. I actually really like the gameplay of Fire Emblem Warriors 1 a lot. I think it did some really smart things that kind of carried over ideas from Dragon Quest Heroes about what if you could command units? What if you could, start to plan your battles strategically and you were also that high level commander that was saying like, okay, I need this force to go here and hold here because you're going to be better against this type of unit and things like that. You're playing that sort of game. I think Fire Emblem became the perfect ground for doing that, but then Warriors, the first one, the story didn't work out super well for me. The character selections were not as wide and varied as I'd hoped. um Cut to Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, I think this is one area where focusing in and going after a specific thing really actually worked in their favor. I love the what if situation of it. I love a lot of just seeing these characters in a new light. It managed to funnel in a lot of the Three Houses stuff. Ironically, that's also why I never finished the game, is because it made the game really, really long. The same as adding all that stuff to an original Fire Emblem game made Three Houses probably the longest Fire Emblem game to actually complete out of any Fire Emblem by far. Did the same thing to Fire Emblem Warriors, but I think it added a lot to the conversation, made it like a really interesting game that probably would get a lot of people into Warriors games if they had not been into them already. That's kind of the way to to trick them into eating their vegetables, I guess. That one's pretty up there, and I also still have a lot of love in my heart for Dragon Quest Heroes, the World Trees Woe and the White Below. That was, I think, a really, really just cool way of envisioning the history of Dragon Quest in a single game. And that's where you have that ability to command monsters around and things like that. Never got around to 2. I've heard 2 is very good. It has like
Mm.
some open world stuff in it that I would find pretty interesting, but I try to space out my Musos so I don't burn myself out on them.
It is easy to burn yourself out on them.
They make a lot of them. Like
They
if you
really do.
go look at Omega Force's Wikipedia page, it's a lot of games. They produce a lot. Again, they just made one this year. Like Dynasty Warriors Origins came out in January of this year, and now Age of Imprisonment is coming out real soon.
So I want to give a shout out to Persona 5 Strikers.
Mm.
The game itself is good. Like I think that I gave it an 8.25 out of 10 when I reviewed it for Game Informer. But mostly for me, it was just like, oh yeah, this is like a sequel to one of my favorite RPGs of all time, and I get to spend more time with these characters that I loved spending so much time with in Persona 5 and going on a road trip. It's not just in Tokyo this time. It's all up and down mainland Tokyo or mainland Japan. And that was really fantastic. I thought it was a really clever twist to, yes, there is kind of like the over the top action of like, slashing through 20 characters at once. But then when you call your persona, it almost turns into a turn-based game in the middle of it. It's almost like that Final Fantasy VII remake balance where it's like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
action-based, but then when you want to do magic or cast a spell, it turns into turn-based while you navigate the menu. And I thought that was really clever.
Yeah. I think that was a really interesting. I'd like to go back to it because I think that one is where I really felt burned out by the additions to the combat. And it was one where I felt like adding so much dialogue, while obviously a boon for anybody who enjoys Persona 5. I kind of felt the same way about Tactica, where I felt like some of the story additions just kind of pulled a little bit too much and added a little bit too much and made the gaps between the actual gameplay a little bit too long for me. But I do
Mm.
think I want to go back to Strikers at some point. But Omega Force is that company that kind of keeps reinventing itself. And I say that because I also want to highlight briefly, uh, y'all will know Omega Force from a lot of games that have warriors in the name. You may not know them for a lot of games that you would not expect they have worked on, including Winback for the Nintendo 64. A true knowers know about Winback on the Nintendo 64. Also co-developed Dragon Quest Builders 2, which is I think maybe one of the best Dragon Quest games I've ever played. And they're working on Pokopia. I
Oh yeah,
literally
that's
learned this
right.
as I was doing research for this. I was like, they're working on Pokopia, but yeah, they are. This
Can't
is
wait.
Omega Force, baby. They make games.
I can't wait to use that Ditto abomination in Pokopia to swipe through hundreds
Yes.
of enemies.
It's going to kill so many Bulbasaurs.
So getting to like the Musou genre, I know you're also a Magic the Gathering fan, and there's this
Oh yeah, yeah.
phenomenon happening right now with Magic the Gathering where we're getting a lot of collaborations. And I think at first people who are like hardcore Magic fans are like, "Oh, this is cool. Like it's bringing more attention." But now it feels like there's kind of like this shift in opinion of hardcore MTG fans of like, all right, enough. That's kind of how it feels for a lot of people I've talked to. Has it approached that level for you with the Musu genre at all?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because to use the Magic analogy, I'm for what it's worth, I am very deep into Magic now, but I largely jumped in because of the Final Fantasy
Mm-hmm.
crossover. So that, I in some ways I am the problem. But I think the interesting thing is that if you go back through Magic's history, lots of people have had various issues with different sets, whether they felt it was magic enough or not. I mean, if you want to really laugh, there was an era in time where Final Fantasy fans were arguing that Final Fantasy VII was not Final Fantasy enough because it was too different from Final Fantasy VI. And there's crazy stuff out there. There's always this belief of a puerile form of what a series that is so beloved to somebody, it has to be this. It must look like this. You see it with Pokemon a lot. You see it with Fire Emblem a lot. You see it with, yes, Dynasty Warriors a lot, and especially the Warriors games. I think the nice thing is that Muso fans have always loved the bread and butter of this series. So there have been games that have come and gone that have not been fantastic. I mean, Dynasty Warriors 9 was a pretty notable falter for the team, especially after the success of Dynasty Warriors 8 XL. It was really kind of a bummer to see 9 just not really nail a lot of that stuff. And Origins, for what it's worth, the one that I've been hyping up this whole time, does a lot to really do things that you would think would push Muso players away. It is a single player game where you play one character through a campaign and make choices that branch the narrative. And if you're sitting there like, that sounds great. Well, most Dynasty Warriors players are used to you play an arcade mode type thing where you play through a campaign of that character's life in the Three Kingdoms and see everything from their perspective and get all their weapons and get all their bodyguards and companions and all that and get their horses because horses are a huge thing, especially in older Dynasty Warriors. And then you go play somebody else's campaign, and you play somebody else's campaign. And the fact that there's really only one playable character, there are other playable characters in that game, but you only briefly get to play as them and only very specific ones in very specific situations, was a huge departure. But Warriors fans loved it because it was capturing a lot of what the spirit of these games are. And so, for whatever reason, you'll probably find naysayers. You pick up a rock, you'll find something skittering around. But it's I think there's a lot of love for what these games do that nobody else really does, and that has managed to subdue most of the complaints. And for my own opinion, I want Omega Force to just keep experimenting because I think for every time that they miss the bullseye, they do also manage to hit it pretty often and come up with something that is really unique and really interesting and manages to push their own genre forward. It's rarely felt like they've become complacent. I think they're very invested in continuing to develop this design space as well. And I haven't really noticed the IP spinoffs really holding any of that back.
And I mean, I'm sure it's similar to your introduction to Magic.
Yeah.
It's a good entry point because like I never played a Musu game until I played Hyrule Warriors. And then I went on to play Persona 5 Strikers and I've kind
Mhm.
of branched out from there. So I'm sure that it's a net positive, even if like the people who would prefer we get an annual Dynasty Warriors game are maybe like, man, stop wasting your time with with Hyrule Warriors and Persona 5 Strikers and Dragon Quest Heroes and all that stuff.
There's also an element of like this stuff is probably paying the bills for some of the Dynasty Warriors games,
Probably.
because I don't know sales numbers off the top of my head, but I think especially for games like Dynasty Warriors 9, which got absolutely roasted at launch, doing a few Nintendo published games and Atlas published games and things like that probably helps keep the doors open in a lot of situations.
That's absolutely fair, and I mean, we see that with a lot of developers these days. So now, next week, believe it or not, we are getting Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, which I don't know, it feels like it snuck up on us. This has been a very
Yeah.
busy stretch. Feels like there's been minimal promotion from either Nintendo or Omega Force. It's the third Zelda Musou game, and this time they're once again talking about how this is a prequel, but it's to Tears of the Kingdom this time instead of Breath of the Wild. And the story takes place during the past scenes where Zelda traveled to in the main game of Tears of the Kingdom. And the story will allegedly take place over the course of the imprisoning war that led to Ganondorf's, kind of accumulation of power and ultimate imprisoning, as the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom depicted. How are you feeling about this game? Are you going to be checking this out when it comes out next week?
Oh, I'm definitely playing it. If anything, just to see how it performs. I really want to see if the performance has gotten a noticeable boost on the Switch 2 hardware. If having this new console means that it could be sitting at a stable 30, God, fingers crossed, stable 60 would be sick. But I'm also curious because I do think Tears of the Kingdom, I don't know if I would ever say is one of my favorite Zelda games, but I do have a particular fondness for the world and the story of it. I really loved. I was the person who I didn't really care much about the main story, but or whatever you would consider the main story, but I did really like the past visions and also a lot of the side quests, a lot of the towns, a lot of the places you could go, like Hateno Village and all that, where you could
Mm-hmm.
get really invested in these different zones and the stories there. The newspaper quest is honestly maybe one of my favorite things in that game entirely, and it's just helping a dude do newspaper stuff. It's great. And so I really hope that there's some semblance of that in this game of seeing these places again in a new light and kind of fighting over them and defending them and all that. I think that would be really fun. Also, like, I at this point am assuming they're going to do some timeline stuff. They're going to find a way to do some wacky things in there that will make this, quote unquote canonical, non-canonical, the way that Age of Calamity went. And maybe knowing that going in will just kind of like shelter me from that a little bit, where I'm like prepped and I'm ready for it. um but yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't know that I would call it a heavy hitter in any sense, especially compared to ZA or Metroid Prime 4. I think this is kind of a lower end game, even though Zelda is arguably one of Nintendo's largest properties. I just don't think a lot of people are going to be lining up for this one. I don't even know if they're doing midnight releases for this or anything at like the Nintendo store or anything, but
Haven't
uh
seen anything.
yeah, I'm curious. That's how I would put it. And again, I will show up for whatever this team puts together. I always love seeing how this genre can develop over time, and I think that's kind of where my head is at with it. I really do want to know what the end roster ends up looking like, because Age of Calamity, I'm double checking this right now, had 18 playable characters, 14 through progression and 4 through various side quests, which is actually like on the fairly low side for a Musou game. And that was obviously because they did a lot of things where there were only specific characters that were available and things like that. But I'm really going to be curious with this game, where your pool is potentially even lower than it was before, how they kind of develop a cast that's going to feel very distinct and very unique and memorable. Because a lot of these characters we only saw in flashbacks. I love imagining Link picking up one of these tears from the dragon like carvings and all that, and going back and being like, what was happening in the past? And it's like Zelda doing an air juggle combo and like flipping a bunch of dudes in the air and the numbers ratcheting up, and he's like, oh, that's crazy. Yeah, I'm curious to see how this all plays into it and ultimately like what the ultimate result ends up being from all this, you know?
Yeah, and it is kind of weird that like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are the two that they've chosen to have these insane action games be like prequels to, for lack of a better word, because like those games are so like meditative and like one person running around in this giant open world and just kind of like quiet exploration moments. And then yeah, like you said, like in the past Link was comboing thousands of enemies, and then apparently Zelda was doing the exact same thing in Tears of the Kingdom's timeline as well. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of contrast that exists between it. But to your point, you did mention like, oh, I hope it runs at 60 frames per second. Nintendo hasn't done really like much in terms of like detailing what these games are like, but because of that, we've had to rely on people getting early looks that maybe they shouldn't have. I saw a YouTuber got to at least play a demo that I don't know was supposed to be accessible to them or not, but
Ooh.
they did say that it appeared to be running at 60 frames per second.
I
So,
would love that to be the case because I mean, I I have become a bit of a 60 frames a second guy. I think I have hit that point where I would rather a game be lower fidelity and be running at a stable 60 or even higher. And I would prefer that to a higher graphical fidelity and a stable 30 or less or you know fluctuating. So I would love that to be the case. I really hope it is.
yeah, I've also gotten that way, especially with fast-paced games
Oh yeah.
like Sonic. Like I remember I booted up Sonic X Shadow Generations on Switch 2 just to test it out when it first came out. And I was like, this looks like garbage. And then I went into the menu and I was like, oh, because it's on like resolution mode, I want performance mode. And then it immediately looked like so much better
Mhm,
because
mhm.
those frames, those dropped frames, when you have it the lower frame rate setting on a game like Sonic, it really does make a difference. And I would say that for like big open worlds, it's also like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom in 60 frames per second is the upgrade I never thought I never knew that I needed when it hit Switch 2. But now it's like, oh my god, I can't even imagine going back to 30 frames per second. And same thing for Ghost of Yote, which I'm currently playing. Having
Mhm.
that on performance mode is just like chef's kiss incredible.
Yeah, I've been like I said earlier, most of my life was PC gaming and Nintendo handhelds, and I got very used to frame rates because even on handhelds, a lot of the times, unless you were trying to play something that was like a weird port to 3DS or something like that, a lot of handheld games would prioritize frame rate over graphical fidelity because often graphical fidelity was a limiting factor on those handhelds. And so they'd say, okay, well, we'll just make it run real smooth then. And that's why you have a lot of those Fire Emblem games still look really, really good because they have high frame rates and run super smooth. So
Mm-hmm. So other things that we know about Age of Imprisonment is, you know, it takes place in the past during the imprisoning war that we saw through the flashbacks in Tears of the Kingdom, but it stars Zelda, Rauru, Sonia, the sages, and then there's also like a new construct machine that may or may not be shaped like Link. My theory is it's probably Link like inhabiting this through these flashbacks and taking part in the battles.
sure.
I mean, whatever.
I guess. I don't know. I imagine the champions will play a factor in some way. I can't imagine they don't. I would like to see some stranger picks, you know, arrive. Again, the newspaper guy would be great to see. I think he'd be really fun. The bard character from the DLC in Breath of the Wild, the one who you kind
Oh
of go
yeah.
around and find everywhere. I would love that. That'd be so cool.
Have him in the
Uh,
past, and that would explain why he wasn't in Tears of the Kingdom, like going
Yeah,
around
yeah.
singing.
Yes, he wasn't in tears, and
He
I
got
looked
teleported
everywhere
back
for
too.
him. Yes, yes. He's like the wandering minstrel in Final Fantasy 14. He's just there when you need the excuse to do it. Like I think if we're gonna play fast and loose with the timeline, we should play really fast and loose with the timeline just so cool characters can be there. That's like the ideal. So yeah.
So the story is that Ganondorf has launched an attack on Hyrule after he swore fealty to King Rauru, and now it's up to Zelda and the rest to stop him. We saw cutscenes of this in Tears of the Kingdom, but none of it was playable. And I do have to say that, like, I typically do enjoy the ability to learn more about like the lore and see these battles play out, like at least in some form. And I think that, like, if there is one part of these quiet meditative games that are going to lend themselves to being adopted or adapted to a Warriors game, it's the Great Calamity from Breath of the Wild, and it's the Imprisoning War in Tears of the Kingdom. Like
Yeah.
those are tailor made. They're wars. They're literally wars
Mhm.
between the forces of good and evil, giving you an excuse for why these guys are taking on these armies of characters.
I would be curious that, there's a few lingering things, and so how spoiler friendly are we when it comes to Tears of the Kingdom?
Let's keep it medium heat.
Okay. Uh, did we ever find out the stories behind some of the dragons that were in Tears of the Kingdom, the ones that are just kind of flying around at different times of the day that you can go land on and all that? Did we ever find out like what their stories
Oh,
are?
with their
Kind of
backstory, like the origin story, kind of.
Yeah, because I feel like that's a
Oh,
big question mark for me from Tears of the Kingdom that I don't know they ever really answered. And obviously, there's doesn't seem like there's ever going to be DLC for it. So I'm curious about that because I think that was always kind of a thing. There's other stuff I'd like to see too, and they can do some cool stuff. I think with explaining some of the weird stuff that happens in Tears of the Kingdom when everything rises up and you got like the ghost ship and all that would make for a really sick battlefield and all that. But I think there are still enough lingering threads that I would like to see them address that I hope they maybe touch on that could just be fun ways to tie in broader Zelda mythology and sort of the traditional themes that we're used to seeing in fun and interesting ways that could play very well into this story format. But we'll see.
so in the gameplay itself, you can actually team up for attacks with sync strikes, they're called. And then there's also Zonai devices that you can use, that's fun. That's a fun use of the Tears of the Kingdom mechanics. I wonder if there's going to be any kind of like Ultra Hand. That would be a weird integration of like Zelda mechanics into the Musou genre.
I imagine it might be like this is just me guessing. I would imagine it would be something similar to just kind of an environmental attack that you can engage in that just adds a different weapon to your toolkit. Maybe is particularly effective against certain enemy types or something like that. That's usually something Omega Force likes to do. I do think the sync strikes look a lot like what was in Origins, where you had certain partner characters that would be kind of your companion during fights. And if you and your partner character had leveled up your Musou to the full degree, then you can unleash your Musou attack. For those at home, when you play a Musou, you kind of have a light attack and a heavy attack, and the heavy attack usually ends your combo. And depending on how many light attacks you have put in, it will do different combo enders depending on that. And then the Musou attack is your super. It's your fighting game super. You build up the meter, you unleash it, does tons of damage. And in different games, you will have different levels of super. If you're at low health or if you've built up a higher level of super, you get a higher level of attack. And in Dynasty Warriors Origins, you would unleash a double Musou or special Musou attacks in certain conditions with your companion character. Seems like they're kind of doing something similar with this one. And I think that makes sense, especially if it's going to be a smaller roster, that adding that variety will help, change things up enough where you're not always doing the same thing. But yeah, I am curious to see what kind of mechanics they use, because I do feel that if the roster size is a smaller one compared to most Musou games, that having mechanical variety and mechanical depth might assist with that, because realistically most people are going to play the campaign of this game and move on. They're not going to run through replays of it with every single character and stuff like that, the way that most older Musous tend to go. So I could see that being the way they take it.
So with that spirit, if someone said to you, hey, like I love Zelda games, generally I like action games, I don't know if I would like a Musou game, kind of want to know what happens in Age of Imprisonment, like what should they know going in?
For Age of Imprisonment, I mean, I would probably play Tears of the Kingdom, because it really seems like you'll probably get super spoiled on the story of Tears of the Kingdom if you don't do that. there's there's a big reveal that is kind of what I would say is maybe one of the core parts of Tyr's story that I think they're going to have to address at some point in the story.
Mhm.
And I really don't think there's going to be any way for them to get around that. So I would definitely make sure you do that. Otherwise, I think going into it, I just say it's, just be familiar with the world and know who your favorite characters are. Go in and be like, oh, I want to check this character out, but have an open mind. I think the fun thing about a Musou game is I always go in thinking I'm going to play one character a lot because it just fits my style. I like their character, I like their personality, and usually that holds. There are certain characters throughout those games that I really like playing as, like Zhai Hao Dun and Sun Shangzong in Dynasty Warriors, but I usually end up finding a bunch of other characters that I really like playing as because their iterations change over time. So the Zelda in Age of Imprisonment probably won't play like the Zelda that was in Age of Calamity or the one that was in Hyrule Warriors Definitive. So yeah, just go in with an open mind and greet it with a pure heart.
Well, it does seem like Zelda has like a mix of like magic and like melee attacks, which looks pretty cool.
Mhm.
So it'll be interesting to see how she plays, especially as like what seems to be the main character of this game. So that's really
Finally,
cool.
we get playable Zelda thanks to Omega Force. People were really hoping for it with Tears, and we didn't get it, and then we just get it multiple times over with Omega Force. They're the ones delivering.
Well, if this all sounds up your alley, Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment arrives on Switch 2 on November 6th. We are going to take one final break, and when we return, we've got a couple of newer releases to give our reviews on. We will be right back. We are back for the final time this episode, and we have a couple blasts from the past to talk about at the final segment of this episode. And Eric, there was a rather large, rather critically acclaimed game that released a few weeks ago on Switch and every other platform. It also happens to be a remake of one of the most beloved games in the history of Square Enix, and it just so happens that you reviewed it for Game Informer. Before we jump into your review, let's start here. Talk to me about your history with the original Final Fantasy Tactics.
I don't have a very long one, so it won't take me long. Yeah, strangely enough, I said it earlier. I love Advance Wars. I love Fire Emblem. I love a lot of tactical games all the way up through XCOM, Enemy Unknown, and Shin Megami Tensei Devil Survivor. We will have a new game. It will happen. Atlas can't keep remaking other games forever. It will happen.
That's what
But
you think. That's what you think, because we're about to get our second Persona 4 remake.
I love to joke that every time there's a new obscure Atlas game like Rido that gets a remaster, I'm like, look, they're gonna run out of games eventually. They're gonna have to get to Devil Survivor at some point. It will happen, believe. Um, I love Devil Survivor. That is actually probably my top 3 all-time games.
Wow.
Uh, but despite all that, I never really played the grandpappy of the whole genre, really. I mean, there's kind of 2 main games that form the fulcrum, the cornerstone of what tactics games are in the traditional sense, your grid-based, turn-by-turn, all that kind of stuff. And it is, if we're not counting Fire Emblem, which has a very important role in all this and would be kind of a different branch entirely. That's a whole thing. We don't need to get into the taxonomy. Tactics Ogre, and then Final Fantasy Tactics. Tactics Ogre got its remake with Tactics Ogre Reborn, and then we got Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles. I only played the first FF Tactics probably about 2 years ago or so. And I played it up to and a little bit past the Weegroff fight, which is an infamous fight in that game. Like, super well known. If you've played that game, you know which one I'm talking about. And I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It didn't, immediately jump onto my top 10 all time or anything like that, but I was like, it's really cool that I have this familiarity. Ivalice Chronicles is out, and I think this was the moment where it cemented my love for what this game is. I think, as I wrote in the review, if we're going to make a canon, which we don't do, we don't have a lot of ways, I think, to canonize games. We're still a fairly nascent industry, and we do have the Game Awards and things like that. But I think we as an industry struggle to recognize what the crucial works
The
are
required
within our medium.
readings.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The idea that you would sit down, it's like, okay, Moby Dick, Great Gatsby, things like that. Or for film, you have your Citizen Kanes, which is like the traditional like Casablanca you go back to. It's like, okay, it's overdone how often that gets pointed to, but they're really important, really meaningful films for the development of the medium. And Final Fantasy Tactics is one of those games. It is an important game with a capital I. And I think Ivalice Chronicles is so exciting because it really does finally give everyone a chance to play this thing in a way that is really modern, has a lot of great quality of life changes, and still retains every ounce of that charm from the original. They did not completely re-envision it. They did not completely change it. In fact, all of the additions that were not there in the original only feel additive in a way that makes them feel natural, and it's really something. I had my nitpicks. You can read more about it in the review, but I mean, this is the GOAT, man. This is like I struggled to think of a game like this where if anybody else walked up to me and said, "This is my favorite game of all time, it's Final Fantasy Tactics," I'd be like, they got taste. They know what they're talking about. They are learned in the ways of games. Like there are plenty of games that people would say like, I love The Witcher 3. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, a lot of people love The Witcher 3. Yeah, that makes sense. But FF Tactics, I'm like,
Like
where's
you
this
know
got?
ball.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. That's a knowledge haver right there.
I think that was former Game Informer editor Ben Reeves' favorite game of all time, if I remember correctly.
Ben Reeves got good taste. What can I say? Like it is that simple. And I really think that this game is something special. And I'm glad that it got this thing that can kind of enshrine it in a time capsule for a little bit longer, because that's the other difficult part about our industry is it's really difficult. You can go back and you can watch VHS tapes, you can watch DVDs, you can do all that, you can listen to music. We were talking about vinyl earlier, but I think our industry especially struggles with the turnover of games and how hardware reliant we are. And so to have this way of playing tactics is important. Again, I'm going to use that word very intentionally. It's an important thing for us to do, and I'm glad that Square Enix finally did it. And did it right.
So we've talked a lot about tactics in this episode, and we've mentioned Fire Emblem, we've mentioned the Mario plus Rabbids. One of my actually definitely my favorite tactics franchise is XCOM, especially the
Yeah.
more recent games. I love Enemy Unknown. XCOM 2 is fantastic. For people who have played maybe some of the more modern games, because as you were referencing, Final Fantasy Tactics has not been playable on a modern system in quite some time.
Mm-mm.
But now that it is, like, if somebody's like, okay, yeah, I like some of like the more modern stuff, but I've only gotten into the franchise like, maybe the past 10 years, or the genre, the past 10 years. How do you recommend people approach Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles?
You want to find the executable on your system files that says no, it is. I think in some ways people can sometimes misconstrue what tactics is because they will make it sound very intimidating. It is a very intimidating game. I don't want to like shortchange that. It is uh it is not overly difficult, but it will challenge you. And I think a lot of the quality of life that happened with Ivalice Chronicles is an effort to make some of that feel a bit more natural for the modern player. So a lot of the traditional soft locks that could happen where you get stuck in fights where you're not strong enough to beat the fight and you can't go fight random battles to get stronger. You're just locked in and you can't move forward. You're going to have to start a new save file. A lot of that has been smoothed over. It's not present anymore. You're fine. Uh, I think the way I would approach it is to just go in saying, do you like historical fantasy? Do you like the idea of a story that's about imperfect people? Do you like a story that is more mature? And again, that's a word I don't use often about games. I think it is deeply concerned with ideas of class, ideas of society, how religion and class shapes the way that we treat each other as people, and how that can even blind us to the ways in which we view the world around us, but also can be eye-opening, and you can see someone grow for the better and maybe even use their station of privilege to affect change in a good way. It is both a depressing game and a hopeful game. And it's, I think, a really, really amazing story that feels important for people to understand and internalize, and to see play out in a video game form, because it's kind of like you get your own little Henry V, you get your own little Macbeth in video game format, and you get to play the battles, you get to see it all happen in front of you, and the tragedy and the drama and the romance, everything plays out in front of you, and you are driving it the whole time. And I do think it adds a lot through that. I think the interactive element is brilliant. I think the job system is some of the best, up there with some of Square's best work, the likes of Final Fantasy V and Final Fantasy X 2, which I think are some of Square's best job systems that they've ever developed. Tactics is right up there with them. In fact, maybe better than both of them. And um, the ways in which you can change this game, you can direct your own path, you can do your own thing, and you can build these builds, and you can play all these different ways. I was talking to people about it who had been playing this game for years, because people still play Tactics, original Tactics. They'll find their methods, they'll find their ways, they have their copies, and they'll play through it, and it's still something that feels incredibly playable. It hasn't lost a single step. And I think Ivalice Chronicles embraces so much of that and says, like, yes, this game is still as good as it's always been. And it's replayable, and it's fantastic to dive into. Some of the best map design I've ever seen in a tactics game. Gorgeous dioramas of so much strategic depth that you have to dive into. I really can't stress enough that I think if you want to understand what a tactics game can be, like where it came from, because this is the foundational work in a lot of ways, but also like still exemplifies the best of the genre, this is the place to do it. This is where you start. It is an important work that has not lost a single step.
And it's also, I think, tactics games in particular play really well on Switch.
Oh God, yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's such a good game to have on the go. And also, it's only $50. I was just looking up like how much the Switch 2 edition costs, 'cause I think the Switch 1 edition's $40.
Mhm.
No, it's $50 as well.
Yeah, this
Okay,
is
so it's a
kind
free
of
upgrade. Okay, it's a free upgrade. Because I saw on the eShop page, there's Switch 2 version, Switch version, and then upgrade pack. And I'm like, are they going to charge you even if you bought the original? But no, it's a free
this
upgrade.
this seems like Square's strategy, especially for the Switch 2, but even for a lot of their games that they've been producing lately, where I think Square's always been a little bit smarter about finding some ways to slide in kind of a mid-budget game every now and then, whether that's a $20 game, a $30 game, a $40 game. Square has always been willing to kind of use the whole range of prices, and I think with the Switch 2 that's been really smart, because I think it got a lot of people to play Bravely Default when it first came out,
Mhm.
who otherwise wouldn't have maybe thought about it if it was an $80 game. But at $50, when you've got your Switch 2 and you've only got Mario Kart World really at launch, and you're kind of like, oh, I want something with some meat on the bones, I want a little single player experience that I can dive into. Well, Bravely Default's right there. And in the same way, I cannot imagine a better time spent on your Switch 2 than a nice little cozy night in with Final Fantasy Tactics. Like, you're going to have a great time. So I think it's a very smart positioning strategy from Square to not just make this, but to like position it and price it where they did, because yeah, it's an easier sell, all things said.
Yeah, and so you gave Final Fantasy Tactics: The Evilist Chronicles a 9.25 out of 10. And if anybody listening to this episode wants to read Eric's full review, they can head over to GameInformer.com. And yeah, anything else you want to say before we wrap up that and talk about one final topic of this episode?
No, I just think Tactics is an incredible game that I think everybody should take the time to play. I really genuinely, I know we're going to be talking about Game of the Year and a lot of new games coming up and all that, and be very forward facing and current facing. But I think if you are somebody who has always said, I've wanted to understand the history of games better, and especially, I grew up, I didn't have a lot of the Nintendo 64 stuff growing up. I didn't have a lot of love for the certain eras of gaming because I just didn't grow up with those. You've always wondered, why do people hold them in such high regard? This is the game to understand why. I think there are a lot of games that maybe don't hold up, people have nostalgia for, et cetera, et cetera. But I think this is one that you will play it and be like, yeah, I get why this is one of the all-time greats. It is absolutely worth playing nowadays.
And I think that people should check it out if they're fans of Tactics, they're fans of Final Fantasy. This is it's no longer, well, I don't have the system that it was on, because what was it, on PlayStation 1 and Was it
PSP was War of the
PSP?
Lions.
Okay.
Also, something I forgot to note. So this is a slightly revised translation that I think solves a lot of the problems, and really just brings the script more in line with what it was meant to be. Has banger line after banger line, just incredible writing, and also voice acting, which I think
Mm.
really sells a lot of the big moments in battles and makes these characters feel so fleshed out and just real again. It's like you're watching Macbeth on your Switch, but you're playing Macbeth. It's great.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on tactics because I have not had a chance to dig in yet. So I'm very much looking forward to having the time to do that. But it has been a super busy end of this year. And speaking of which, before we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about a game I've been reviewing, which is Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection, which hits Switch, Switch 2, and every other major platform this week. This thing is kind of like a tale of, I mean, it's supposed to be a tale of three parts, but it's really a tale of two halves. On one side, you have the playable library, 23 games from the early years of Mortal Kombat. And then, much like a lot of these Digital Eclipse, by the way, Digital Eclipse, the developer of this, the same developer that did Atari 50, Tetris Forever, TMNT, the Cowabunga Collection, the first Mega Man Legacy Collection. So they've got this down where
Mhm.
they've slowly evolved this formula, really reached its kind of current form through Atari 50, where they include a bunch of games and then they include this timeline, which basically serves as an interactive documentary or like maybe a playable museum, if you want to frame it that way. But that's the exact way that this works. So you have 23 games. It's arcade, console versions of like Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3, handheld versions of several of these games. Some of the black sheep of the franchise, like Mortal Kombat 4, which was only in arcades, and so it's very rare that you get like any kind of playable version of this outside of the arcade, which arcades are very few and far between. And I would say that Mortal Kombat 4 cabinets are even fewer and further between because it kind of wasn't the most liked. But also Mortal Kombat Mythology Sub-Zero and Mortal Kombat Special Forces and the Game Boy version of Mortal Kombat 1. These games that just, were not the most popular versions of this franchise. They're all playable here alongside the bangers like, the Genesis version of MK1, the SNES version of MK2, and the arcade versions of all of these games, and they all play so well. I didn't run into any glaring emulation problems or anything like that. There's a 32X version of Mortal Kombat 2, which is cool to see because 32X games, from what I understand, are pretty difficult to emulate. So it's cool that Digital Eclipse got that up and running. I was the only version of Mortal Kombat that I was allowed to purchase as a kid was the Game Gear version because there was no blood in it. And I found a blood code. I remember it was like probably like an issue of Game Pro or something had a blood code that you could type in. And my parents found out that I figured that out, and they immediately took away the Mortal Kombat on Game Gear copy. But I can relive those days now. I did tell Ed Boon that story one time, and he told me to apologize to my parents on his behalf. But yeah, it's really cool to be able to revisit these games. You can tweak it with a bunch of like, all right, I want this to be easy difficulty, or I really want to challenge. I can go in with hard mode. I want to have all the secret characters unlocked in this arcade cabinet. I want to like enable the console commands in this version of Mortal Kombat 2 or whatever. Like so many cool options that you can do. You can change the filter to be TV or like kind of like the warped like tube style. You can add like you can have it so it's like an authentic border. So like because unless you play the stretch, which why would you? It's just going to mess up the aesthetic of the game. But you can do it like I always do full, which is like
Mhm.
it's the same aspect ratio, just taking up the entirety of the screen, not stretching the graphics or anything. Or it takes up the square rather. It doesn't take up the sides, but the sides you can have it so that like, okay, well, it's actually going to look like the side of that particular arcade cabinet, which is really cool. You can have it so that fatalities, you have an unlimited amount of time to execute them. You can go into a fatality trainer and learn how to do all these moves, which is really cool. You can have it so the move list is over in that blank space on the side when you're playing. So like if you have a hard time remembering how to throw Scorpion Spear, you can just have it plastered there the entire time you're playing, which is really, really helpful. Because some of those, especially the early games, some of those inputs were pretty complex and pretty temperamental. And then once you get over to the documentary side, there's so much footage, and they have a good combination of people who were involved. Like they have like the foursome that basically created Mortal Kombat of Ed Boon, John Tobias, John Vogel, and Dan Forden. And then they have a bunch of other people who've worked in the franchise, either as like the actors of the digitized characters, or the guy who did the voice of like the announcer. Because in the first one it was Ed Boon, and then they hired a different guy to do it for the subsequent games. And just a lot of great conversations with those people. They had Eugene Jarvis as one of the main talking heads, which is really cool. And the former president of Midway, the former president of all these different companies. And then they had like other industry people. Jeff Gerstmann plays a pretty prominent role. Mike Drucker, Andrea Renee. So a good selection of folks chiming in with their thoughts on the Mortal Kombat legacy and franchise. And there's also a lot of archival footage, which is really cool because the way that they shot the digitized characters, they would have people dress up as those characters in real life,
Right.
stand in front of a green screen, and then do like the animations, and then they would record it to video, and then they would basically screenshot the video and insert those characters as frames as the animations, so they looked like real people on your screen, which was just completely like breakthrough technology back in the early 90s when the first few games came out. And there's all this footage because they were just filming when they were shooting those animations of like, you get to see like Ed Boon in real time say to the guy who's dressed up as Scorpion, hey, it would be kind of cool if he had this spear that he could throw out. Can you actually, and he's like demonstrating what he wants the animation to look like, coming up on the fly with this move that is now maybe the most iconic move in all of Mortal Kombat, maybe all of fighting games outside of maybe the Hadouken. Like it is, it's kind of cool to just have like archival footage of like them going to a trade show, showing off Mortal Kombat 3, and like having people come through, like arcade owners were coming through and checking out the games and then giving the sales pitch of why Mortal Kombat 3 is like the next evolution. Old commercials, old martial arts demonstrations of the characters the actors who played these characters. The guy who played Jax in Mortal Kombat 3 doing like backflips, and it's like, whoa, he's a giant dude, and he's doing like these like back handsprings into a backflip for these like arcade owners, trying to show them like, hey, this is kind of cool, and we got these real life martial artists and real life actors to show you. And they dive into like the topics of like the U.S. Senate hearings, and they talk about like how they tried and failed to get Jean-Claude Van Damme to be the star, and that ultimately spun off to become Johnny Cage. You get to see like the old sketches that John Tobias did to like conceptualize these characters. 3D renders of all the arcade cabinets, and you can like zoom in on like the boxes of them, and like take a stroll down memory lane of like when we used to go to stores and like look at the back of boxes and have like a little mini sales pitch on the back of like, it's never been realer than this, and see like the little screenshots they had. And like you get to see a good like glimpse into the conniving mind of Ed Boon as he plants these seeds of mystery to the community, because you see this on social media now where Ed Boon will go on and be like, I'm going to post this, and he knows for a fact that is going to ignite the fandom of like, what does he mean by this? And like it becomes this big like real life mystery solving puzzle for the community. And sometimes it's just him trolling, and other times it is him actually like teasing a new game. There are times in these interviews where he's like, yeah, there was no payoff to this. We just wanted to the community to basically like drive themselves crazy to find out, how do you play as Rain in this game? And he wasn't even in the game. We just put him in like the attract screen just so people would go mad trying to figure out the code to unlock Rain. So it's really fascinating to watch that. And it's extremely well done, the way that all of Digital Eclipse's like interactive museums or documentaries are. And it's so cool to see all these relics. And like I put this in my review over on GameInformer.com that like there are a few franchises that I think have as fascinating a history as Mortal Kombat, because it's been involved in like politics. It's been raked through the mud by politicians trying to get these games banned. it was so instrumental in the explosion of the fighting game scene in arcades, especially in the West, because Street Fighter was blowing up at that time, but it didn't really have a challenger. So even though it was more successful at challenging Street Fighter than Sega was at challenging Nintendo, it's impossible to tell the story of the fighting game genre without talking about Mortal Kombat as much as you talk about Street Fighter, just like it's impossible to talk about the 90s in video games without talking about Sega like you would talk about Nintendo. So it's really fascinating to go through that. It takes a few hours to get through the interactive museum as well. So it's really in-depth and a lot of really great discussion points and historical references and everything. So if you're a fan of Mortal Kombat, this is an easy recommend. The only negative that I really have is the online suite, if you can even call it that. Because right now, at launch, there's no way to play with friends. It's just matchmaking. You go into the game you want to choose or you want to play, and you just do quick match, and it will match you with somebody. Digital Eclipse has said that they are adding, private lobbies and all that stuff post-launch. But for right now, it is just this weird matchmaking that doesn't even really work that well. But they are going to have rollback netcode once it does work. So it feels a little incomplete in that regard, especially for a fighting game collection where it's like, yeah, I forget how many games it is. I think it's like 7 or 8 of the games are online enabled. But they're saying shortly after launch, they're going to add all of these functionalities to make it a more robust online suite. But it right now, it just feels not quite finished.
Yeah, it's a really strange omission. Like you said, that's been the big driver behind a lot of Capcom stuff, which I think, Capcom's been doing a very good collection of collecting their games together. And even though it doesn't sound like it's as produced as this one is, where it has the sort of documentary footage and all that, like those games, you pick up Capcom Fighting Collection 2 and you want to play CVS 2, you just boot up online, make a lobby and go. And weird to fumble that part of it when like you said, ultimately these games are a cultural moment in the US, especially. I mean, Mortal Kombat alongside Street Fighter, one of the few games I would say has broken into the mainstream consciousness of being part of just general pop culture, like can stand alongside each other in that way. But it is also like it's about fighting games, it's about community, it's about playing these games against each other, and that seems like kind of an own goal to not get that right.
Yeah, well, at least they have like detailed a roadmap saying like, here's what we're going to do. But for now, it's a little disappointing. But at least you still have the 23 games to fall back on. You can play locally or just do like random matchmaking. But if you're hoping to play with a friend, just maybe hold off. But even then, like if you just want to pick this up and watch the documentary for now, like that's entirely an extremely valid way to enjoy this collection. And it's so well done. And I give it an 8.75 out of 10. It was going to be a 9 until I kind of dug into the online functionality. So I think very highly of it. And if you want to read my full review, it is live right now over on GameInformer.com. Eric, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of All Things Nintendo.
Thank you for having me. It was great to finally get on, talk about Nintendo, and chop it up about all the different weird sicko genres that I obsess over.
Yes, it's a perfect fit for you. And I'm glad we finally had an excuse to have you on the show. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. As you know, my Patreon and associated Discord server are the best ways to get any questions or comments in, but you can also email me at brian@allthingsnintendo.com or hit me up on Blue Sky or Instagram at Brian P. Shea. Eric, tell everyone where they can find you online.
Well, you can find me over on GameInformer.com, where I do video work over there. We got various different things going up this week. Hopefully, we're going to have some cool stuff going up pretty soon. The next couple weeks that y'all should keep an eye out for. And you can head over there, follow all our stuff there. As always, Axe the Blood God, an independent RPG podcast I co-host with Nadia Oxford and Victor Hunter. We are still ongoing and doing a lot of stuff. We'll probably be talking about Dragon Quest as of this recording this week. Nadia actually did the Game Informer review. That was a nice little happenstance that, funny enough, I didn't know was happening until it was basically already done, because of just the ways that the internal sync ups work. Is that it was like, oh, Nadia's writing a review for us. Oh, it's Dragon Quest. Hell yeah. Like that's perfect. So That was great. So go check that out. You can go check out our podcast. We talk about all things RPGs over there, and Normandy FM, which we literally, as of this recording, just wrapped our Nier season. So we have fully covered the Nier series, Replicant and Automata, and all of the etc. lore that is kind of floating around it. We're taking a bit of a break because obviously that was a lot, and finishing the season was a lot, but we will be starting up in 2026 with Dragon Age The Veilguard. We'll be talking about that game, its history, its development, going through it piece by piece, and kind of talking about how it maybe represents a very pivotal, if not potentially like weird note on the history and legacy of BioWare, because as followers of the games industry may know, BioWare is in a particularly strange place right now, as is all of EA. So look forward to that. It'll be a really interesting season, I think. You can find me on Blue Sky at cmoosey. I post weird musings over there, like I think it would be harder to haunt an apartment than a mansion because you have less square footage to work with. You can just find things like that on my Blue Sky.
Well, that is our show for this week. Thank you again for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Hey everyone, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to this podcast. It really means a lot. Before we call it a day on this show, I just want to give a special shout out to the $10 patrons of the podcast. Alex Stadnick, Andy Junkins, Ben Richland, Chaps My Ass, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beeman, Ian T. Clark, Jason Thompson, Jawar Hello, Johnny Five, Jose Villalobos, Joshua DeProy, Casey Radio Man, Cody Gibson, Creeper 207, Ozman 83, Paul at Drunk on Mako, Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Mac 265, Robert Sosa, Roberto Nieves, Roger Reichert, Russell Sayer, Smithy Poo, Zane Sink, and Zek Three Sword Sama. Truly, thank you so much for continuing to support the show. I don't know that we would be able to continue doing this if you were not here helping out.